Welcome to the Performance Formula with Jody Martins. So, Michael, officially welcome to the Performance Formula podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Jody.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I think we both come from different places, yet I think we might have some similarities with a lot of the things that we think about. Maybe just for everybody listening in, if you could just sort of give us a brief summary of who you are, what you do, where you're from, and then we'll get into the conversation.
Great. My name is Mike Huber. I'm a certified mental performance consultant, and I work primarily with young athletes. So any high school and college athletes here in the U.S., typically 14 up to 22, and also work with some professional athletes. So in my private practice, and I'm based in New Jersey, which I learned is before we started recording. You're also in New Jersey. I'm in a place called Aberdeen, which is about an hour south of New York City. I've been here for about 10 years. So that's where I own and operate my practice.
Brilliant. Yeah. And firstly, thank you for your time. I mean, not necessarily at times it's difficult to get guests for a podcast. And, so I'm hugely appreciative of you being willing and open to coming on here, sharing some thoughts, and we bounce around some ideas about what we do and how we do it. And hopefully everybody else can learn from that. At the end of the day, that's what it's about. So
sounds great to me.
Yeah. So to get our conversation started, seeing that the podcast name is the Performance Formula and seeing that that's something that really interests me is trying to understand how athletes can be at their best more regularly, more consistently. So if there was such a thing as a formula for performance, with all your knowledge, all your experience, all your understanding, everything that you've learned, what do you think would be some of the important things that we need to consider to be part of that formula?
So that's a hard question. But I think for me, like when I heard you ask it, I'd say like for me, it's about process, right? Having a process to respond, a planned response to adversity, right? That's a big thing that kind of comes through in my coaching. And everybody has a different framework and a different lens and different priorities and all the things that they value. But for me, it's really about when that mistake happens, when that failure happens, and the thoughts and the feelings become negative, what's our planned response to bring ourselves back to the present moment, right? Being mindful of this thing is happening and I'm feeling negatively and I want to really like give into it, but I have this sort of automatic response or reset to, hey, like I got to get back here to this place in the present because that's where performance happens best. What sort of colors in those lines? There's a lot of things we could talk about there, confidence and, motivation and all these different skills that we teach and learn as coaches. But ultimately, it's about the framework of having that process. Because once you do, then you can kind of fill in the blanks with whatever works for the athlete, right? They can kind of fill it in their own way, which is I'm a big believer in that. Me telling them what they need to do is definitely not as effective as, hey, here's the framework. Now let's figure out what works for you.
You definitely mentioned a couple of things there that's piqued my interest and my curiosity. So, and we might stumble through this a little bit, right? It might be a little bit all over, but so the first thing that sort of jumped to me there is a process to respond. Can you maybe expand on that a little bit and what your perception is on that? How does a process get us to respond? And I suppose my question comes a little bit because it's textured by an understanding that a lot of times athletes tend to react. And so that's why it sort of jumped at me a little bit. So I'm curious to sort of get your take on what you mean by that.
Yeah. So I think you know exactly where I'm going, right? Because one of the things I talk to athletes about is that respond versus react contrast. Reactions to me are emotional, right? Something negative happens in the environment or they perceive something negative to happen. That creates an emotion that dictates what they do next. And we know that's going to happen. That's just the way that our brains work. That's the way we respond to any situation that we feel like we're threatened, right? Like, and that includes I'm not performing my best or something happens that I perceive to be negative. Well, I know it's going to happen, right? And I generally know when it's going to happen based on past experience, especially if you're dealing with more seasoned elite athletes, right? They know the pitfalls that they're going to face because they've been through them. So let's identify those pitfalls, knowing that we have history to kind of lean on and go, well, okay, what's the typical response? Oh, I get caught up in my head. I get emotional. I react. Maybe I get angry. Maybe I lash out at an official, a referee, or a coach, or a teammate, or someone playing against. Or maybe I just get really internal, meaning like I get really hard on myself and I sort of shift my focus internally to like, oh, what's wrong with you, right? It becomes very negative, and I don't know how to get out of that. And a lot of times what I find, and you could certainly, tell me if you see something different in your work, which is it's not until they get another result that's more positive that allows them to shift out of it, versus like, I don't know when that next positive result's coming. So if I rely on that, I could be on a roller coaster. I could be dragged along for an extended period of time before I'm able to actually opt out of that, right? So for me, it's like, okay, let's talk about when it happens. Let's have a plan to be present to it, right? Like knowing when it happens, because sometimes when those emotions happen, even though we're prepared for it, that emotion still kind of washes over us and takes over. So let's get good at being mindful, recognizing it, right? Let's have a way to sort of start over, right? Whether that's take a deep breath or take a deep breath and give myself some sort of cue that brings me back to the present moment. That kind of tells me this is the way I want to respond to it. So I know it's almost like you're talking to yourself, like before it happens. Hey, I know I'm going to react this way because I've done it before. No, this is the way I want to come back to the present. Hey, I want to attack the next play. I want to be aggressive. I want to be relaxed. I want to be smooth. Whatever that cue is that works for them. But I want to be ready with it. And if I'm not ready with it, I'm just going to get dragged along by whatever negative response happens. I'm going to react rather than respond, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%. I actually have a name for it. I call it the doubt dilemma. The doubt dilemma. It's this dilemma that we sit with, that I need performance. I need the result to go my way in order to have confidence. Mm-hmm. Yet a lot of athletes will say, no, I need confidence to perform. And so it's like, I need the performance to give me the confidence. Yes. But at the same point, I need to find the confidence somewhere because I'm not always getting it from performance. And so I need to find the confidence somewhere in order to perform. And so it creates this dilemma that they deal with, that I think at times athletes look for it in the wrong place. They try and find their feel good or their readiness for performance in the wrong place. 1 and 2, they let performance dictate too much in terms of how they feel.
Yes, I agree with that 100%. And I think that's pretty universal, actually, right? And especially, I think the distinction that when we talk about confidence, right, we want to like rely on past successes, right, as a way to sort of generate that confidence. But what I find, especially with young people, maybe more so than more adult elite athletes, and maybe it's true of them as well, because I don't work with as many of them, is that they just rely on the most recent sample, right? Like what happens right now? I had a bad result right now, so I feel bad about myself, versus there's all this evidence. There's a whole library that got you to this point that says you're really good at what you do. And there was one bad outcome. There was one mistake. There was one thing. And we focus in on that so narrowly, like something's wrong with me. I can't play. I performed poorly right now. And that means that I'm going to perform poorly going forward, versus, hey, it was one bad play. Let's move back to like the norm, which is I'm really good at this.
Yeah, I like that. I like that sort of approach to it. In my head, I'm sort of sitting and I'm going, okay, but there's a flip side to this too, right? Because you work with baseball players.
I do.
I know a little bit of the stats because I've looked into this, and I'm not necessarily sure if I'm 100% accurate with them, but this is where they're similar. So if you take a batter in cricket and you take a batter in baseball, or hitter, I'm not too sure if a batter is the right word.
Batter or hitter is the same, yeah.
Same thing, right? So the best batters in the world, the absolute best in the world, succeed between 30 to 40% of the time. In other words, they fail between 60 to 70% of the time. And I saw a stat somewhere that in baseball, hitters hit the ball 30% of the time. So it's a fairly, maybe that's not a measure of success, but I thought that's a stat that's fairly similar. And so I think, and I think you alluded to it, like you spoke about how we reframe the emotions. You didn't use those exact words.
No.
But it was sort of to look at the emotion in a different way. And so I think a lot of this has to do with how we look at failure in itself. It's from the get-go to say, hey, I'm going to fail. It's actually it's a natural part of the sport that I'm busy with. And so instead of trying to avoid that, part of the strategy is to reframe it completely from the get-go and think about it completely differently, rather than letting it be this thing that takes away our confidence or destroys our ability to go and perform. We understand that the likelihood of me succeeding, like really succeeding, is actually a third of the time. And so the other 2/3, if I let that break me down, then more often than not, I will be a doubtful, fearful, non-confident player. And so it's not necessarily that healthy to seek my confidence in that. I can rather seek it in my preparation, like you said, the library that you've built that. I can seek it in past successful performances where I've done my best, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, the statistics are pretty much spot on, right? The best hitters in baseball typically are, and it depends on level, right? But typically are 60 to 70% of the time they're failing, right? So it's really right on the mark, right? And I agree with you completely, right? How we define success is another way to sort of talk about it, which is I'm a big believer in that, right? Like what's success mean? Does it have to be a successful outcome, or can it be successful execution of the process that you've set for yourself, whether it's a preparation process or an execution in a competitive environment? But I think what you said is really important. I'm actually curious from your perspective with cricket, and I think it's a human condition thing, but like you're right about reframing failure right off the bat, right? Like if we reframe failure and start from there, then everything going forward is a lot easier to sort of make sense of. But what I find is that, for a lot of athletes, they start when they're really young, right? I'm sure cricketers do, baseball players certainly do. They start at 5 years old when they pick up a bat. Well, for the 10 or 15 years that they're going before they get to meet somebody like me or you, they've established this precedent of the way they view themselves is viewed solely through the lens of outcomes, through statistics. So now you've got to unwind. We have to, as mental performance coaches, try to unwind that of like, no, everybody fails at the same rate. It's going to be okay to fail. But for them, like maybe it makes sense intellectually, but when they get into that stressful environment, they go back to, oh, I failed. I'm a failure. This is terrible. And that's a really hard thing to chip away at because they have this long lineage of learning how to define themselves, which is I've got to get successful outcomes or else I'm not good. And so we're helping them reframe that, but we're kind of working against the 8 ball because they've already kind of learned a certain way.
Yeah, and at times working against the system.
100%.
I can't speak my knowledge of other coaches in other sports in the US is not my library. There's certainly not very big. I don't have a lot of examples. I've not seen a lot of other sports coaches coach, etc. But I can certainly speak from a South African perspective that a lot of the athletes I work with, they would go back into an environment where a coach would be telling them, listen, if you're not performing, you're not playing. Or their agent would come back to them and say, listen, if you're not scoring runs in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to struggle to find your contract. The CEO of an organization or the principal of a school says, listen, we're giving you a bursary. Or, we don't know if we can have you around if you're not contributing on the field.
Mm-hmm.
And so the system in itself, I think from a sporting point of view in general, I mean, wherever you go, most probably, if you can have the greatest technique, you can have the greatest skills, unless you go out on the field and you actually execute that, you impact a game positively for your team in some way, the likelihood of you having a career, et cetera, is pretty low. And so I think this is the conundrum each athlete faces, is that there's don't know if you experience the same, but whenever I start speaking with athletes and I start showing them where their performance actually comes from, they go, oh yeah, that makes sense. It doesn't come from this. And when I put these pressures on me about runs and have to score and the results and the outcomes, if I put that on my shoulders, like I actually don't perform. When I don't think of those things, when I think more of, say, a process or, then, hey, the runs come, the performance comes, everything starts happening. And so they live in this constant battle, I think, athletes, between the understanding of what actually has them at their best versus what the environment expects of them. And so it's that sort of dilemma, conundrum, whatever you want to call it, that I believe the best they figured that out to a certain extent. And they can place them in their different places and they can understand what value they bring and where they don't bring value, and then they don't engage with it.
Yeah. And so I think the system, like you sort of started out by saying, like, I think that's absolutely true. And certainly here in the United States, and I don't know how it is abroad, but I'm sure it's not very different, is that pressure to produce has started much younger, where we've created this environment where very, very young, we'll stick with baseball players, but you can substitute any sport. Very young athletes are being judged on performance at a very young age because there's these more competitive type teams and environments that they're playing in at an earlier age. So that pressure starts to build from a very early age. Like you need to produce in order to be part of this travel club, and you need to produce to earn your spot versus, hey, let's go learn how to play this game with enjoyment and freely and have fun and develop and focus on our growth and development. And so they learn that they learn it from their parents who are responding to that environment as well, right? So the pressure kind of grows earlier, and it's really harder to break through that because they have established this pattern over time, which I was sort of getting at before of, hey, we've been in this pressure environment for 5, 6, 7 years already, and we don't know anything different. So now you're coming to me, Mike, or you're coming to me, Jody, and you're saying to me, hey, you don't have to think about it that way. That can actually be really confusing to an athlete. Like, it might be relieving. They might find relief in that and feel like remotivated and feel good about the fact that they can look at the world a different way. But at first, it might be really confusing and be a conflict because it's like, no one's ever said to me I could just go out there and relax and have fun and not worry about the outcomes, because no one's ever said that to me before. It's kind of weird, but it's true.
Yeah. And I don't know if you find this. I'm dealing with I say deal, I'm not a big, I don't like that word, but I find a lot of athletes that I work with, and I don't think I've ever sort of touched on this on the podcast, but what I find is that they understand the concept and they can apply it in this phase of their lives. So I'm a high school athlete, doing pretty well, making sort of my, the higher levels of my sport in my region. And then again, I know, in the US, you've got drafts, player drafts, and all these sort of things happening. In South Africa, it's just, if you're good enough and they like you, somebody will contract you, kind of thing, right? And so then when it gets into that sort of phase, like I'm going maybe just from like just a high school athlete to all of a sudden, okay, now I'm getting paid for this. Then it's almost like this thing rears its head again. It's like, oh, shucks, no, now I have to perform because now somebody's paying me. And so even though they understand the concept, like if I focus on my outcomes, it doesn't deliver performance. If I shift at a simplistic level, there's obviously more to it, but, just for the example, then as soon as they go to the next level, all of a sudden that comes back in.
Yes.
Then maybe they go to a bigger stage than that. Okay, well, now I'm on TV regularly. Oh, shucks, now I have to perform because a lot of people see me.
Yes.
And then maybe there's a bigger level. Okay, I'm going to the Olympics now. Okay, well, the whole world's going to see me. And then they have to. So it's almost like there's layers to this too. It's not necessarily just, okay, I got this. Okay, and I'm going to be fine for the rest of my day.
Yeah.
The rest of my life.
And that's actually something that I agree with you 100%. And I think that's human nature, right? Every time we pass through a new gate, we've got to reacclimate ourselves to that environment, right? Like, so for instance, like I'm very big on talking to athletes about the transition from high school to college. And I have a number of those athletes that I work with now in my practice. And I have one particular who plays college baseball who found himself in that situation where he went from high school to college. He's in his first year in college. And the very first series of games they played was against one of the best teams in the country. And it was in a place where they had like 7,000 people watching the game versus he came from high school where maybe 100 people, if that, watched the game. So for him, he was reacting to the environment of like, wow, look at all these eyeballs watching me. And that created an external pressure for him. He was like, well, I have to perform because all these people are watching me. And so like, I think that's real. Like, I don't think we can ignore it. I don't think we're not robots. It's going to happen. But that's why, to go back to earlier in the conversation, that's why I think having that process is so important, right? Because regardless of where you play a baseball game or a cricket match and what's around you, right, there's still this ability inside those lines to control your thought processes, to control the way you think about the game and keep that focus narrow on what do I control. This process looks exactly the same whether or not there's 50 people or 50,000 watching me. Now, I'm not saying that's easy. It's very difficult because you're human, but at least you have some semblance of consistency in the process when you get to that next level, when everything around you, including the relationships that you form, we could talk about that if you want, right? That relationship, when you go to the next level, there's expectations, or they're paying me. So now I have to deliver something, whether it's real or perceived. And now I have different relationships with my coaches and teammates. And now there's a lack of stability and trust that I have to rebuild. And that comes into the equation. So like, how do we manage that as well? And how does that factor into the way we feel about ourselves as athletes?
Yeah, a lot of that I agree with 100%. There was something you said there that I wanted to grab onto. And I think you then said, well, maybe we can talk about the relationships. And I think that took my thought away, to be honest. So maybe by way of sort of just taking the conversation forward, right? So like, what is it that you think is important in those types of relationships? What's it that shifts or changes or adjusts or that they've got to be mindful of?
Well, I think it's a great question, right? I think, the word that sort of jumps to mind is trust, right? Meaning when you jump to a new level and you go to a new club, you're starting from scratch to a certain extent, right? The people that you're dealing with, unless you have some past history with them, they don't know you, right? And so a lot of times I think it's about feeling like you have to prove your worth through your performance versus starting to like approach that environment with curiosity, right? Like, I want to get to know these people. I want to get to know them personally. I want to get to know the environment. I want to learn in this new environment what I need to do rather than coming in with this preconceived notion or expectation in my mind that I need to deliver this result or else.
I like that.
And that's really hard, right? It's really hard to go into that new environment and be like, you know what, I'm going to come in here. It's like being a CEO of a new company, right? Or you come in and like a lot of times, like people would perceive a CEO coming into a new company and going, well, I have to come in and take control. Versus a lot of times CEOs come into companies and they go, I'm going to watch for the first 3 or 6 months. I'm going to observe. I'm going to ask a lot of questions. I want to understand what makes this place tick so that I can contribute in a way that's consistent with the environment and the culture. Because yeah, I'm setting the culture, but at the same time, like if I try to dictate that, it might not work. So when we come into a new environment, are we asking questions? Are we being curious about what we're getting into and who we're working with and what they want from us, rather than going in and assuming I think I know that and that I have to perform a certain way in order to feel like I've established my value. Now that creates, like you said, some of that pressure of like, oh, now I got all this expectation on my shoulders and I need to do this. And I don't even know that to be true. Now it might be true, but even if I just have that conversation with a coach and say, hey, coach, what do you expect of me? Now I've heard it directly from his mouth and I know what I need to do potentially to meet that expectation versus I've created this expectation in my mind, but I have no idea what the coach actually expects of me in this environment. And I'm guessing at it. And that guessing creates an anxiety. And that's absolutely something I hear a lot from young athletes is that they create these expectations in their mind, but they don't actually have the conversations with coaches about what the expectations truly are and how can they meet those expectations because they're afraid to have that conversation or those conversations. And that's a big part of it.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I love that. I'm thinking about, and I think you said it so good that it made me sort of realize how I've had these conversations with athletes and like my sort of, without maybe recognizing it in that exact way, where it's like, well, can you have that conversation with your coach? Like, is that something? Because I think what people like you and me with our skill set has, and I suppose what comes as like a presupposition, you're going to the mental performance coach. In other words, you've got to be telling them stuff, right? If you're not telling us anything, then we can't really help you. And if you sit quiet in the corner, I wish I had a magic wand that I just could go whoosh, off you go, right? And so I think people understand, athletes understand, and that's normally something I check for. Like, unless you can speak with me and you're prepared to go where you're, and speak about the ugly truths and everything your mind sort of conjures up inside there, then I can't really do much.
Yes.
Like my ability to support you is diminished. And so for me, that's like a prerequisite. And so then often they would come sit and have these things and say, oh, but my coach this, and I'm not sure about that. And then I would normally do the exact same thing. Well, I don't know if I'm the person you should be having that conversation with. Like, you and I can have a great conversation. I can put your mind at ease. It's not going to solve the problem unless you go have that conversation with your coach, with whoever it might be, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And let me just say this too, because what you just said about the requirement, the necessity of the athlete sharing what goes on in their mind, like that just sort of reinforces for me as a mental performance coach, like that's the way I want to do things too. And one of the things I've been fighting recently is the urge to speak, right? I've been speaking a lot more than listening. And that's something I'm working on, right? So when you said that, it was like, okay, like that reminds me that I need to really be listening. And if they don't share with me, then whatever I say is probably not going to be all that helpful versus them telling me what they need and listening and letting it sit and then pointing them in the right direction. That being said, what you just talked about, I literally had this conversation last night at like 6:00 with a client who's playing college baseball, another kid different than the one I was telling you, he's not playing, he's not getting playing time. And he doesn't understand why. He's guessing at why, right? And he's talking to me about like, I think I know why this is happening. I think I know why this is happening. And, he's trying to like analyze and dissect like all like the evidence and be like, oh, I think I know. And I'm trying to like figure it out in my head versus, yeah, you're trying to figure it out, but there's still that underlying anxiety of I don't really know. And until I know, right, like I'm still going to have that doubt, right? And so the only way to relieve that doubt is to have that conversation or at least make the effort. But like you said, can I have this conversation? Like, what's the downside? What's the consequence, right? Well, you've got to decide that for yourself, athlete, right? Like, and he said to me, he said, he's like, it can't be worse than it is right now. Okay, so what does that tell you? It's time to have that conversation. Okay, well, how do we want to have that? Right? So we talked about how do you want to approach it? And what I said to him is like, be careful about going in there and making it about you, right? As much as you want it to be about you, you could probably figure out the answers you're looking for while making it about the team or making it about the coach, right? Like, what can I learn from you, coach, that's going to allow me to be a better player and put myself in a position to succeed and contribute to the team? That's different than why aren't I playing, coach?
Yeah.
Your decisions suck, right? Right. And like, listen, coaches are coaches. They're at the level that they're at, especially at that level of baseball. They're there for a reason. And part of that reason is they're good at what they do and they have a bit of an ego. If your 18, 19-year-old kid comes in there and starts questioning their choices without understanding the reasoning behind it, it's not going to go well, right? But if you go in there looking to be curious and learn about how you can be better and let them tell you, well, now all of a sudden you've created a dynamic of I'm going to get the information I think I need and I'm building a relationship with my coach. But for an 18 or 19 or 20-year-old young person, those conversations are really hard to do, right? So like what I try to do is help them prepare for that, right? Whether it's what are the questions or how am I going to respond, right? How do I want to feel coming out of it, right? And it may not go exactly the way you want it to, but ultimately, if the feeling you come out of that conversation is with a sense of relief, then it was probably a success, even if the answers weren't exactly what you wanted to hear.
Yeah, because you don't know what the answers are going to be.
Right.
Yeah. But I love what you say there. I think if you set up those conversations in a way that it's not about you, and maybe it is about what can I learn here? What is my next step? What is the thing I've got to be better at in order for me to get more game time, The flip side of this, of course, is because there's not just athletes listening to my podcast, there's coaches listening in here too. So the flip side to this is that maybe in our conversation, I want to highlight to coaches is that you have athletes that feel like this in all likelihood in your team. And I'm saying this to myself at this point in time. I work with teams and things at this point in time, And so there's always athletes that are unsure, unclear. And so we have to do more as coaches to communicate more clearly to all our athletes exactly where they are, what they stand, what their next step is. If they're out the team, how they can get in the team. If they're in the team, what are the things that they can do more of? What are the things that we want them to do less of? And maybe to those that are exceptional, what they need to do in order to get to take their next step, right? Because I might be the main player in this team and I'm nice and comfortable, but playing college, whatever, is not the same as playing professional. Right. And so what is your next step on this journey and how do I as a coach support you in that?
Well, a couple of things I want to add to that because I think it's really important. And this is something that, because I think you're right. And I think sometimes this is me making assumptions, but I'm going to make an assumption and I'm going to state it up front. I think sometimes team coaches, like athletic coaches who coach the teams, there is a disconnect or conflict with like mental performance coaches, right? Because they think that maybe we're siding with the athlete and that we're only like interested in what they're going through and we don't really care about what the team is going through. At least as a private practitioner, I think I've had that perception. We're not in this together. I'm helping the athlete maybe in conflict to what they want to do. Right. But what I would say to a coach is like, I'm also mindful of that. So I try to teach my athletes, especially based on their age and their development, about empathy. You need to understand, athlete, that your coach gets paid to do this. Your coach feeds his family by being a coach and winning matches and games and performing at a high level as well. And they've got to make choices about what's best for the team, but it's also what's best for them based upon their preferences and their experience and all those things. If you're not part of that equation, there's a reason why. Now, you might not understand it, athlete, as to why you're not playing, you're not on the roster, you're not whatever, but they don't have to explain that to you if they don't want to. And you have to learn patience and learn how to settle yourself. So there's a two-way street, right? We can't, I think sometimes with young athletes, especially in the US from that high school to college jump, they're used to getting coaching proactively from their coaches, whereas now maybe they've got to coach themselves more, or maybe they've got to go to a coach to get the information they want and need to develop because the coaches don't have the time or wherewithal to give it to them. That's a very traumatic thing in some ways. And like, oh, I'm waiting for my coach to come coach me, but they're not coaching me. And now I feel like they don't care about me. But that might not be true at all. The coaches care about you and they want to develop you, but they've also got 40 other guys they got to take care of. So if you don't take ownership of your development and you don't come to them and express like, hey, I want to get better at this thing, I need your help. Like they may not have the time or the resources to come to you and give that. And that you have to learn that as an athlete, that's on you in some ways.
I agree with that because my sense is also at times that athletes expect the coach to be perfect.
Yeah.
Right. So they have to take care of my needs and I'm only thinking of me. I don't care about anybody else in the team because it's just me, my performance. And so now this coach isn't giving this to me. So I love how you sort of explain all of that in terms of how the athlete should potentially be thinking. I often say to them, listen, athletes are also humans. Do you wake up and you have a bad day? Get out the wrong side of the bed? What if that was your coach on that day? He just got out on the wrong side of bed, didn't feel great, and now he didn't greet you properly, and he was a bit harsh with you in the warm-up because you did a little something not, but for the athlete, I get that it's in the moment. It feels like it's their whole world. It's everything, they give their everything to this, and then a coach comes in. And so I agree, I agree with you that it's a two-way street. And I think athletes can certainly be more mindful of what coaches go through. And I certainly think coaches can be more aware to make sure they cover more angles.
Yes, exactly. And they can try. I think that's a big part of this, right? Making the effort, whether you're a coach or an athlete, like that attempt, you're not going to control the results on the other side, right? If we stick with the athlete, you go to have that conversation that you feel like you need to have. And you don't get, like you said, you don't hear what you want to hear. You don't get the result you want out of that. Well, that's just life, right? Sometimes we're going to hear things we don't want to hear and we have to make sense of it and go, how do I move forward, right? And I think that that's not always easy with a young person. The other thing that I would inject into this, and I think, again, maybe this is more about from my world and where I sit, it's also parents are a factor in that equation, right? What I mean by that is the parents are the ones that start out at a very young age nowadays talking badly about a coach or blaming a coach. The coach doesn't know what he's doing. The coach doesn't like Johnny. The coach, and these are people who've never coached anything in their lives, or some of them have never been athletes in their lives, but they sort of focus in on the coach as being the reason why their athlete's not succeeding. And that's not true. But if the athlete hears it, that influences like, oh, this coach is supposed to take care of me. They're supposed to be perfect because I've always heard from my parents, it's the coach's fault. They need to be better for me. Coaches are human too. They get out of bed on the wrong side sometimes. And you need to be mindful of that. And you need to be prepared to handle that as an athlete and as a parent, because it's not always going to be perfect.
Yeah. I was at a session on Sunday, a 3-hour coaching session with a team, and I was tired. I've had a long week. It's Sunday. It's late afternoon. I was giving it my best, but I was nowhere near where I would normally be, right? If I think of my own standards.
Mm-hmm.
So it was an interesting experience when you have parents afterwards saying to you, "Are you okay? You look very tired." I'm like, "Yes, I'm tired."
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of important messages in there for everybody.
Yeah.
So you can go. Earlier in the conversation, you spoke about this idea. So it's a process to respond. And I love what you said after that, like a plan to adversity. Because sport and performance and all these things, you're going to face adversity. What is that process or that plan in your mind? I think you referenced like a framework at the same point in time, so like, what is that? How does it look? How does it play out?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question for me to like reflect on and think about. But I think, we've talked a lot about expectations in general. And I think reframing the expectation that there's going to be failure, right? There's going to be adversity. And when you do that and you set that like baseline, it's also a lot easier to sort of move through the adversity because you're like, well, I knew this was going to happen anyway. So what am I going to do? Am I going to respond to it or am I going to let it take me down? Right. So for me, the way I typically coach it is that response to adversity is about having some sort of value-based cue, right? How do I want to play the next play? How do I want to show up going forward once the adversity happens, right? Making it more about me as a person versus the result, right? It's not, I want to go back out. Like the one that I hear a lot of, and I'd love to hear your opinion on this, is like, a typical kind of reframe or like restart cue would be like, oh, I got this. I don't love that. Right now, if it works for somebody, that's great, right? But like if you tell yourself, I got this, and you don't really believe that you got this, you're going to put yourself back into conflict, right? Versus, hey, I want to play the next play on the attack. Well, I control whether I attack or not. I don't control the outcome, but it's up to me to decide, do I want to be in an attacking mindset on the next play, or do I want to be in a passive mindset? And success is strictly, if I attack, I have success. If I'm passive, it's not successful. Okay. Now it's completely in my control versus basing that sort of restart into the environment, going from internal in your mind to out here playing. If I make that about an outcome and I shift to, oh, I got this, or like, I want to make the next basket, or I want to do whatever, like now I'm putting my mind back into the framework of, hey, I need to go get a result to feel good about myself versus if I just go attack, if I just go hustle, if I play with effort, like that's a win to get myself back into the environment. Now I can be present doing that. And whatever happens next, I'm ready for it because I'm doing that thing that I said that I want to do before it happened, right? And I think passivity is a big one for a lot of athletes. They go back into the environment after a mistake and they're just passive. They don't want to make another mistake. And so they end up playing in a way that doesn't allow them to flourish because all they're trying to do is blend in and stay out of the way.
Yeah. And not make more mistakes.
Yeah, exactly.
Just trying to avoid rather than take part.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, like the example I would give you is with like a basketball player. This comes up a lot with basketball players. They miss a few shots and they start to get down on themselves and they're afraid they're going to get taken out of the game. So they don't want to come out of the game for making more mistakes. So they just stop shooting, but then they just try to find a way to blend in to stay on the floor, but they don't actually want to take the risks to do something to contribute. Right. So what's the point of that? I just want to stay on the floor to say I was on the floor and like I didn't come out of the game, but I actually wasn't willing to like take the next shot that was open because I was afraid to miss. Like, is that really the way you want to play a game? No, if I'm out there, I want to go out there and take risks and I want to be successful or I want to be able to deal with the failure. Either way, I want to be a participant. I don't want to be an observer.
Yeah. In South Africa, we have this saying, well, I say we have a saying, I don't actually know if it's common amongst everybody involved in cricket, but it's like, do you, especially if you think of things where people want to become like a professional and they want to like wear a certain type of cap and a brand, then we often say, do you just play like, and it especially happens like at under 19 level where there's like a SA under 19 team that goes to a World Cup. So do you just play to get the cap? Or do you want to play in the cap? And so it's so I think that's what you're alluding to, right?
Exactly.
Like it's just do you just want to be in the game, sort of just floating around on the floor there, or do you want to actively be involved in the game? Do you actually want to be playing the game? And if you're playing the game, there's ups, there's downs, there's highs, there's lows, there's emotions, there's challenges, there's defense, there's attack, But I mean, if I just think about that, that's why we play sport, is to do that.
Yes.
It's to be involved in those battles. It's to get stuck in, to get messy, to get in the mud. And I think, we, even in South Africa, a lot of the time we use the Michael Jordan and the Kobe Bryant quotes, right? They're from the US. We know these things. Now, yeah, I've taken 9,000 shots and that's why I succeed. I've missed more than 9,000 times, the famous Michael Jordan thing.
Yeah.
And he sort of goes through all the important games where he's missed. And he says, that's why I succeed. And so you used these words a little bit earlier, and I have this perception about mental performance is that mental performance is simple. These are not difficult things necessarily, but it's not easy.
It's hard.
It's hard to apply when the pressure's on. It's hard to apply when your mind goes in one direction and that's not the direction I want to be, and you want to try and reverse it to the other side.
Yes.
It's hard. It's hard, yeah.
Yeah, and simplicity, I think, is a thing that I've learned in my practice is like, and I'm going to steal somebody else's line here, do simple better, right? Like get really good at that one or two things that helps you, right? That's why to go back to sort of the reset process or the process for dealing with adversity, if you keep it simple and you already know what the answer is before it happens, now I don't have to think about where to find the answer while I'm trying to play a game in the mud. in the mess. Like, I know the mess is going to happen, and I know exactly what I'm going to do when the mess happens, right? This is my answer. So I don't have to go searching for it in a sea of thoughts and emotion, right? It's just like, hey, that happened. I know it happened. What's that one thing, whether it's something I say to myself, it's something I look at, something I do that reminds me like, hey, I need to be in the mess to really be present to what's going on, because that's where the best performance happens, regardless of what happened, just happened before, or what happens next. That's a really hard thing, I think, for anybody, for a human being, because what I explain to young people particularly is that's the way your brain works. Your brain wants to take you to the future, to plan for that threat that's going to come again, or your brain wants to take you to the past to dwell on what you didn't do or you didn't do well. You're fighting against that natural inclination, that wiring, if you want to call it that. So you got to prepare it for that. Like, it's coming. So if it's coming, what are you going to do when it comes? Right. And I do find that it's really, really helpful, especially when it's simple, because the young athlete goes, oh, I could do that. That's simple enough. I can do that. When I make a mistake, I can say this to myself. I can take a deep breath. I could go through this process really quickly, A, B, C, D in 5 seconds. And now I'm back in it, where I can at least try to be back in it, versus all this stuff making it too big. And now it's so big and overwhelming that we say, forget it. I'm done. I'm going to just throw in the towel and wait for the next game to come and reset everything that way.
Yeah. You've sort of alluded to this idea of a process. I like to call it, you've got like your cocktail, like how you drink a cocktail at the bar. And if the mixture of the cocktail is a bit off, then the cocktail doesn't taste too nice, So you've got to mix all these ingredients well together and shake and stir them to have an enjoyable experience when you play sport. And so I've heard you speak of sort of self-talk. I've heard you speak of breathing a little bit in this conversation. What other ingredients would there be from a sort of process point of view that you would think athletes, coaches, parents, whoever's listening could be mindful of, that they've got to be aware of? Like, hey, these are things that we could potentially build into some process that could get me to get back in the game, as you say.
So I don't know if this answers your question, but this is something I'm a big believer in, is one, having an active process, meaning doing something. Right. And a lot of times the way
task focused.
Yeah, task focused. Right. And so for me, a lot of it can be visual, meaning like writing something down somewhere on your person, on a piece of tape on your wrist, on your hand, on a piece of equipment as the reminder, right? Like, oh, I know it's there. Because in the beginning, right, that idea of, oh, I'm going to set a reset cue for myself. Yes, intellectually makes complete sense. That sounds great. Like, it's going to be the reminder to do this. But if I don't have like an active process and a reminder, I'm going to fall back into the habit of going into like that mess of thoughts in my head. So I write something down in my hand, like, what's my refocus cue? I'm going to write it here. I'm going to write it here. I'm going to write it here. I'm going to put it under my hat if I'm a baseball player. I'm going to put it somewhere to be the reminder of like, oh, I know I have this, for lack of a better way to put it, like this cheat sheet. This crutch of like, let's start with that, because now I can go to it and be like, it's not going to leave me. The analogy I'd give to an athlete is like, and they may not relate to this because they're young and they don't do grocery shopping, but when I go to the grocery store without a list, invariably I forget something. When I go with a list, I remember what I need. Well, if I go into a match with a reminder visually, like I have a list, a checklist, or one thing that is that thing that's going to bring me back to the present moment, and it's there on me somewhere, I'm much more likely to access it than if I don't. Now, eventually, are they going to need it? Maybe they won't. Maybe it becomes an automated second nature process of I know what my reset process is. But to get started, we need some training wheels. And that's okay, right? Is it better than being caught up in your head and being negative and playing poorly? I would hope so, right? If you're not willing to do that little thing, that simple thing, that also tells me a little something about your motivation and about your ego and about kind of where you're approaching things, and trying the willingness to try something new and drop your guard and do something differently, even if it feels awkward, is a really big indicator of somebody who's willing to succeed or not, in my book.
Yeah, I like how you explain that, because I find that often, maybe let me say it like this. So my strategy with this is to help athletes discover what that would be for themselves, rather than give them a suggestion, right?
Yes,
so,
exactly.
So again, like, I got this at times could be an easy sort of thing that one person passes on to another, but it's so generic. And so yes. I love that they can rather find something that is unique to them.
Yes.
Their word, their phrase, and the meaning that they give to that, and the significance they build into that, right? And then once they have that, I do find that there is at times like that resistance to then put it out there, to show it in a place, you know?
Yeah.
In the world of cricket, a whole bunch of years ago, there was a cricketer from England that a photographer got, so in cricket, the bat's handle has a grip on it and you can slide the grip up. You know, it's like loose on the bat. It's not something that's permanently attached. Like
Okay.
on a tennis racket, the grip is
Right.
tied down.
Affixed, yeah.
Where in cricket, you can move it around. And so if you rolled it down on his bat handle, essentially underneath the grip, he wrote words then. I don't want to say them here because they had some profanity in them, right? But still, like, it's unique to him.
Yes.
Right. And so he wrote that on his handle. And
Perfect.
that is like the mindset that he wants to cultivate when he goes out to perform, right? And so I think it's such a great example. And here's a world-class cricketer that does it, that gets photographed, like it's there for everybody to see. Yet you're 15 years old and you go, I don't know, I feel uncomfortable. I'm like, well, so I agree with you.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
So
it's like, how willing are you to go to have something that can actually help you and support you, and you understand the importance of it and it's yours.
Yes.
Yet you come, when the wheels come off, you go, I don't know what to do. Oh, well, we know what to do.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. And I love the way you described it. It's right on the mark. Right. And so, like, what does it mean to me? Right. Like, it's an identity based reminder and an identity based cue versus who am I? And I ask the question to a lot of athletes when we go through this process of, like, how do you want to play the game? Right. Like, that's like my question to them. And it's really hard or confusing for them because, like, they don't think about it like, what do I want my identity to be on the floor, right? Or on the court or on the pitch or whatever, right? They think about, I need to go generate a result. They don't think about, like, who am I at the core of me? But the ones who get it, they come up with these really meaningful cues of, like, I have one athlete who's a basketball player. For him, it was make an impact, right? For him, he's like, I just want to help the team win. That's who I am as a basketball player. Now, all of a sudden, it's like when I fail and I get down on myself and I miss a shot, I just remind myself, like, go make an impact. That could mean playing defense hard. That could mean cheering on a teammate. That can mean passing the ball to somebody who's open. You don't have to be the star or you don't have to be a scorer to make an impact. And so now all of a sudden it becomes like, how do I put myself aside and just contribute? I loved that because it was really about his identity as a player and a person versus I got this, I need to go produce some result because I need to feel like I'm confident to do that. That's more generic, to use your sort of wording. And so I love what you said. And what I like to do is to give the athlete a permission, like to say, hey, just try it. And if you don't like it or it doesn't work or you're not feeling good about it, we can throw it in the toilet, but at least give it a shot and see what happens. And if you try it and you like it, well, now we're on to something. If you try it and you don't like it, hey, let's scrap it. It's up to you. I'm not going to force you. I'm not your coach. I'm not going to make you do something. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. There's a consequence to that. You're probably not going to like the consequence, but I'm not going to force you to do it. And I think a lot of young athletes do like that autonomy because it's something new to them. And it is confusing to them at times because they're so used to being told what to do. You should go do this. Just go do this. Do this or else. Do this because I said so. They're not used to making their own choices and formulating their own opinions and decisions. And it's awkward for them and uncomfortable because it's a brand new thing to take responsibility. It's also scary because if I do it for myself and it fails, now it's back on me. It's not on anybody else.
Yeah, I can't go blame the coach.
Correct.
And say, oh, it's because of the coach that I did this, or yeah. There was an overrider I wanted to put on that, just that, I don't know what your thinking on this is, but I find that at times athletes look for the holy grail, right? So it's okay. So this season is, what was your example there was, make a difference. Let's just say that, right? Like, that's my thing. Okay, I'm going to go make a difference.
Yes.
But now my sense is that at times, and mostly, that stuff is really powerful initially. And then over time, it can lose its power, right? Even if it is who I am. And that could be for many reasons, because maybe performance isn't going that well. Maybe initially it gives me a bit of a boost and then sort of the performance starts slipping. And so it feels like it's lost its power, but also because we change as people. Maybe my role in the team changes. Maybe some significant event happened in my life. A parent passed away, or my beloved grandfather who was always at my games, right?
Yeah.
They're not there anymore. And so something is different. And so my overrider is just that we change as human beings. And so the things that drive your performance can also change.
Yes, exactly. And I think sometimes, again, and I'll just speak from the perspective of, and I think this is probably any athlete, frankly, but from a young one, I think sometimes they need someone to give them permission to be that way, right? To feel that way because they've been conditioned and they're scared. It's scary to like shift that perspective and that focus and who I am as an athlete, right? Like that's really hard. And to have somebody, and I do feel like I do serve as that voice a lot of times in the process. And I'm guessing you probably feel the same as well, which is like, hey, this is possible, right? You don't have to do it. You don't have to listen. You don't have to try it, but it is a possibility. And it sort of opens that door to, hey, maybe I can try this. Maybe I can shift the way I think about this. Maybe I can be a little bit different than I want to be or someone else wants me to be. And it's okay. Because I think sometimes that's really hard for a young athlete to look and see like, oh, I'm gonna try this differently. I'm gonna shift my perspective because it's like, well, it's the fear of the unknown is scary. It's a brand new frontier, if you want to put it that way.
Yeah. Mike, I've loved this conversation, and I feel like we can just keep going and keep going, but I know you've got things to do, and I sort of just require 60 minutes normally of people's time. I love these conversations, and maybe in future we can always jump on another podcast and share some more ideas, right? There's a whole bunch of topics here we didn't get into and we didn't get stuck into that can be explored,
Yeah.
If people sort of listen to this and they're sort of keen to maybe connect with you, what would be the best way for them to do that?
The best way is to visit my website. It's Michael, V as in Victor, Huber, HUBER.com. And then everything you would need to find me, communicate with me, free resources, all that stuff is on the website. So yeah, check that out.
Cool. I'll make sure all the links to that is below.
Thank you.
In the description of the podcast.
Wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Same. Thanks, Michael. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.